morning and welcome to the 40th squeaky voice this morning episode of the Slow Crafting Podcast. Now this is normally a bi-weekly podcast exploring how I incorporate a slow living or slow fashion agenda into my knitting, spinning, sewing, crafting endeavours in general, with a view to increasing my handmade wardrobe. Right, today's episode is a little bit different because, as I promised you last time, I've got some books to review. Now, they're not all modern books by any stretch of the imagination, but they're ones that I'd got recently because I thought they would be interesting, and it's not always about buying all the brand new books that come out, and it's about, particularly this year with my word being thrifty, it's about making use of the resources that are already out there. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is, this might be back to front, I'm not quite sure, Patterns for Guernseys, Jerseys and Arons by Gladys Thompson. Now this is an old book. It was originally published in 1969, but that itself was a revision of a book published in the mid-50s, I think. I think this version is the 1971 version, but it's still really interesting. Now it's talking about fishermen's sweaters from around the British Isles, and if you like Elizabeth Zimmerman's style of telling you a story along with talking to you about patterns and how they're constructed, then you'll probably enjoy this. She's got some really interesting stories in there about chasing sailors along docks and down alleys because she saw a nice pattern on their fisherman's sweater and wanted to know more about it and how it was constructed and what the actual stitch pattern was. But yeah, there's something, you can just imagine it. Obviously, quite an obsessive knitter myself. You do look at people and you're like, ooh, that's hand knit. Ooh, I'm interested in that. But whereas now, if it's slightly more subtle, she was there chasing sailors down docks, which I think is hilarious. And I do also love this book because the patterns, or discussions of the patterns, are broken down into different geographical areas because each region or harbour area had its own specific set of patterns for recognising the fishermen from that area. And I mean, she talks about Partington and Withensea, Flamborough, Filey, Scarborough, Robin Hood's Bay. Obviously these are my favourite because these are all Yorkshire ones. Brunswick Bay, Whitby, Staithes, then getting a bit further afield, Northumberland, Sheringham, Caister in Lincolnshire, Musselburgh, Fife, and then there's a range of Scottish patterns, and then some from the Isles of Arran in Ireland, and then some from the Outer Hebrides. I've got a favourite bit in this book, and it's when she's talking about when she was staying in Yorkshire to find out more about the patterns in different particular places, and I'll just read you this little bit. During the summer, her house was overflowing with visitors, and the same people came to her year after year. She was also a great knitter, and through her I came to know many of the Filey patterns and to learn the names of the different stitches. I often slipped up to her cottage in the evenings and listened to her lovely East Yorkshire dialect and learned to knit the different patterns she was always ready to show me. She talked very fast, and it was difficult to follow all she said. She called her knitting needles pins. So that just gives you an example of the sort of prose style of Gladys Thompson. But I also like it because I am from East Yorkshire myself, and any praise of our strange and unusual dialect I am quite happy to take, even if it did come from well before I was born. But yes, there's lots and lots of photographs, and it's all in black and white, but there's pictures of, like, there's charts and a picture of the sample of the knitting stitch or the stitch pattern that it refers to. Some of them aren't always clear because, like I say, it is black and white, and some of the charting notations probably aren't what we'd use today, or aren't as in common use as today. Oh, that's not what I meant at all. We're probably not what we used to today. And then it's got, as well as the pictures of the different stitch patterns and then charts, it's got pictures of full jumpers, full sweaters themselves, and some wonderful old-fashioned pictures of the sweaters being worn by the fishermen as they're out and about in different areas. I'm saying that, I can't find you any now. Oh, there we go. So, you know, it's mostly about the stitch patterns and about the charting of them. Now, if you're looking for written instructions for how to knit one of these sweaters from scratch, this is probably not the book for you. It does give a couple of patterns within the book for the whole garment, not just the how to knit this particular stitch pattern, but they are probably not what you would expect as a modern knitter. Now, having grown up in the UK and worked to some very old-fashioned British knitting patterns, and the instructions they make more sense to me than they possibly would to somebody who grew up in America and learnt to knit within the last 10 years. That's not to say you wouldn't understand it, it's just that it wouldn't be as familiar to somebody who was used to working with modern patterns. But yes, there's some absolutely gorgeous jumpers in here. There's one from the Isles of Arran. This one here, absolutely beautiful, and the rear view of it as well. Look at that, absolutely stunning. Now, in my dreams, I would knit something this beautiful. In reality, I think it might just have to be a dream. Certainly for the time being anyway, because there's no way I could knit something that complicated with small children running around and asking me questions. Sadly, this is not one of the jumpers that she's given full garment instructions for, which is a shame because it's absolutely beautiful. But so I mean, that's an all-over pattern. A lot of the other fishermen's jerseys had just patterning from sort of the chest upwards, and it was just really fascinating to read how some of the patterns travelled through the areas, because some of the fishing boats did. You know, they'd follow the fish as they migrated around the coastline, and you know, some of the fishermen follow down, and the women who travelled to sort of gut and clean the fish would travel down with them, and as they were working on the sweaters and things in the downtime, other local women would pick up some of the stitch patterns and they become shared that way. So it's absolutely fascinating piece of history, and it does make reference to, like I said, this is a revision of a book published in the mid-50s, and apparently that had even more information on the histories and stories around the different stitch patterns. So I think that would be absolutely fascinating to track down and read in a bit more depth about. Okay, that's that one. Okay, the second book that I want to talk to you about today is Knitting in the Nordic Tradition by Vibeke Lind. Again, this was published, I think the original version was published in 1981 and the English translation was published in 1984. This has sort of some similarities with the Gladys Thompson book in that it's very much talking about the history of Nordic knitting traditions and giving details of some of the different stitch patterns used, rather than being a pattern book as such. Oh, doorbell. Sorry about that. Let's start again. I'll read you the blurb off the back actually to describe this. It says, after a brief look at the historical development of wool into yarn, because it does talk about spinning and shows you obviously what it looks like as raw fleece and then talks you through the process of getting it to a finished yarn. The introduction provides tips on using the right tools, including how your knitting is affected by different types of yarn that you use. Following patterns, incorporating designs and making edgings and decorative borders. Above all, this book offers suggestions for adapting classic patterns to suit individual needs and to express personal tastes. In addition to scores of helpful diagrams, the chatty and informative text is complemented with many photos of finished projects, as well as historical images depicting people dressed in these beautiful sweaters, hats and other forms of wearable art. Sounds good, doesn't it? And it's predominantly black and white again. There is a section of maybe about 10 pages in the centre that are in colour, but the rest of it's in black and white. And it's very much of its time that it was published. Absolutely love it. These particular bits are my favourite. Very much late 70s, early 80s styling. I did just look at these and go, I could have one of those. Although I do see this sort of jumper here, I do have something very similar but in brown that doesn't fit me, that my mum knitted. She knitted my hair and my dad matching ones sometime during the late 70s, early 80s. Mine's got a hood on it as well though, but I used to wear it all the time when I was at university, but then I felted it, which is why it doesn't fit me now, but I've still got it somewhere. It's awesome. So it's a world away from the sort of fancy cable things in here, but there's just something about that aesthetic that makes me happy. But yes, anyway, so like it says, it's got different historical pictures in here, you know, traditional costumes, and I love this picture. People working in the fields, wearing their hand-knitted garments, so hats, and I think they're wearing hand-knitted hats and jumpers and socks and overjackets, I think, in this one. But yes, it works through sweaters and shirts, like undershirts, knitted undershirts, talking you through their construction, and it gives you schematics for the different ways that they were put together. Let me see. And then it gives you, oh, there you go, some of the schematics for how some of the sweaters were constructed, and then it talks you through a bit about the history of when things were worn and the traditional patterns that were used and what the meanings behind them were. And then here's some more pictures of different patterns and people wearing them in the past. It doesn't really give you any full sweater patterns. again, it gives you charts for some of the stitch patterns or colour work elements, and tells you how the garment's constructed, and gives you a recipe for how to go about putting it all together. But it doesn't say cast on this many, knit this many, this is what's going to fit that size. Although I'm saying that and I'm looking at this, and it has given you on a schematic sizing information and gauge information, as well as needle size. So theoretically you could construct a pattern from it, but it wouldn't. It would be a labour of love rather than a labour of love rather than a straightforward piece of knitting. Now, this is a picture from the 1940s of the Danish royal family visiting Greenland, and I wish I could make my children dress like this. It's fantastic. It's just absolutely amazing. But they're very, very low yokes, because they come almost down to your sorry, poking my boobs at you, almost down to your tummy button to the yokes. So I don't know what kind of arm movement you'd have. Yeah, it talks about different sweater constructions. It's talked about ones with setting sleeves. It's talked about drop shoulder, and there's a section here on raglan shaping and yoked sweaters. So I'm working out how to calculate your yoke shaping, as well as sort of outerwear, sort of quite heavy sweaters. It also talks through the tradition of delicate, it calls them blouses, but I think this seem more of a knitted undershirt, often with lace trim on them. They tended to, looking at this book, they tended to be very plain in terms of the knitting, so they're either done in garter or in stocking stitch, and just a single colour, but then they have lacing either where they're joined at the armholes or around the cuffs and hems. They're called Aunt Anna blouses. Which it talks you through how to knit some baby blouses as well, in a single piece. Well, no, maybe not a single piece. And so really interesting construction methods, because obviously, from, like I said before, I come from a UK knitting tradition, growing up in the predominantly 80s. So I'm used to seeing patterns where it's worked in pieces, flat and seamed. So whilst this is worked in pieces, they are seamed in very different places to I would expect from looking at a traditional baby pattern from a similar era in the UK. But yes, absolutely fascinating. This is another example of one of the under blouses, the Aunt Anna blouses. And that has lace worked on the shoulder. And then it talks about the construction of shawls and scarves. And again, it's got some beautiful historical pictures. I do wonder if my children would let me go out of the house dressed like that now. I'm not far off. But yeah, it's amazing. On this picture, I'm looking at it because she's out with buckets. So she's obviously collecting something or transporting something, but she's also got DP ends and a knitting out, and she's knitting as she's walking along. which they definitely don't let me do, which is a bit of a shame. So yeah, it talks about different shawl constructions, so triangular versus sort of square, hat style, different ways of creating a triangular one, depending on which increases or decreases you use. Adding borders. It's got a section on Faroese shawls as well. And then it talks about making a shawl that's designed to be tied around the back, so that the shaping for that is slightly different. Or semicircular ones. Then it talks about hats. I call them caps in here, so that they are primarily colourwork hats, and they're often knitted double, so you'll knit your lining and then your hat, and then you push the lining in and you wear it double thickness. So they don't tend to have the traditional ribbing round the bottom that you'd expect on a lot of modern hats. And it gives examples of different stitch patterns that were commonly used, and explains a bit about the history of those particular patterns. So it's got dancing women and running children, or just geographical repeats of patterns. So these are some of the hats and things. Now, again, there's a couple of instances where it gives you your cast on number and your gauge, and then some charts, but no other instructions as to how to do it than that. So, like I say, you can recreate some of their garments, but it's not as straightforward as following a traditional, not traditional, a modern pattern. But this is shows you a good example where they've knitted the lining and then knitted what is the outside of the hat, and then it's showing you not only pushing the lining up, but then folding the brim up as well, so that you're left with a bit around here that's 4 layers thick. Yeah, is it? And it, oh, that's a point. It also, for anybody who's knitted some of the woolly wormhead hats, particularly ones from the Elemental series, where you actually, instead of working them sort of bottom up or top down, you work them sideways. There is a description of the process of knitting hats sideways here as well, and how that's achieved. That's interesting. And then it talks about mittens, basic mitten construction, different shaping. So, you know, some traditional ones have the more pointed top and some have more rounded, and then construction if you're wanting fingered gloves rather than mittens. And thumb placement and thumb construction, and different treatment methods for the mittens, whether you fold them or just wear them as they are. And also there's some examples of embroidery on the mittens, which was traditional in some areas, and then it gives you some patterns for creating the mittens or recreating the mittens yourself. So it's got the charts, and then it's got your needle size, your cast on number, and your gauge, and then the finished size for the mitten. but it doesn't tell you anything about the yarn that's used. You just have to be able to give a rough calculation in your mind, looking at the needle size and the gauge, as to what you'd be better off starting with. Some very odd looking mittens and gloves. I'm not sure. Looks like it was a mitten for a lion or something because of the shaping of the fingers. And it talks you through gloves with a Selbu star and traditional Selbu patterning, and it talks you through knitting socks as well, knee socks, not just ankle socks, and gives you schematics and sizing information on how to go about doing that yourself. There's leg warmers as well. So, but these are like thigh length leg warmers, which is just not happening. and the traditional reasons why these were made and why and when they were worn. And then it gives you some information on if you're wanting to do colour work or patterned socks, including how to incorporate the shaping at the back for shapely calves. And it also talks about how to take care of your woolen clothes, which is really interesting. So it talks about how to wash it properly and how to go about fulling it or felting it if that's what you actually want. So yes, it's a really interesting book. It's got quite a lot of information around the history and construction of things, so it was full of information. So I really enjoyed reading that one, and I would like to have a go at some of the garments in there. I really would like to do an Aunt Anna blouse, because I'm always cold. I need a nice woolly undershirt. But yes, now the next one is a little bit different, and that is Knit Like a Latvian. Now again, it's stranded colour work and talks you through mittens, but this is very much a pattern book. So it does have an introduction that tells you the role that mittens play in Latvian culture and history, what the different signs and symbols that are often incorporated into patterns mean. So which one shall I do? And then this upside down triangle is the sign of Mara. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly. The deity of earth and water and all the creatures within. Mara is the protector of women, especially mothers and children. She is goddess of the earth. So I think I need upside down triangles and everything. But yeah, there's different crosses, there's suns, there's stars, references to God and how to incorporate patterns associated with luck and happiness and wealth. Talks you through different tools and materials you need, but it's very quick, sort of one page of writing, one page of pictures, level of information. Talks you how to use the book, how to read charts, and then it gets straight into the projects. So it's all, I'll show it from a distance so you can't tell. Gives you the charted pattern, the mittens, like a photograph of the mittens themselves, and a brief step-by-step description of how to work the mittens. Now, it's some of them, the mittens are the same front and back. So where it gives thumb placement, I'm just trying to work out, because it only gives you the information on thumb placement in one area, which is fine if it's knitting front and back, because then you can knit them both the same but wear one back to front, if that makes sense. The thumb itself has a different pattern on the back than it does on the front, but the mitten has the same pattern on both sides. And it doesn't just do mittens, it does fingerless gloves and wrist warmers as well. Now, sometimes, like this one, it's given you where the back of the glove and the front of the glove are different, so they've got a different pattern, and it's only giving you one position for thumb placement on the inside of the glove. So you will have to work out in your head and transfer it onto the design where it needs to go for the second hand. So it's giving you it for the right hand, and you will have to transfer the markings yourself for the left hand, which on this pattern is quite easy to do because it's a small square repeat, but on some of them it's not always as easy, because I know the dotty prick-on mittens that I knitted, because of the way the patterning worked on those, it wasn't as straightforward to try and work out the positioning. But yeah, it's got some wrist warmers here. There's lots and lots of different knitting patterns, mostly with the traditional, the mittens anyway, triangular shaped top. There's some where you are using 3 colours per row, not many. Although having said that, I've just looked at these grey mittens and I'm like, oh yeah, you're using 3 colours for most of the rows for that one. But a lot of them you are only using 2 colours at a time. And then others, it actually looks, on this one, if you look at the photograph, it's got little red stitches in the middle of some of the larger pattern motifs, and looking at it, it looks like they've actually been duplicate stitched on top, just because of their size in relation to the other stitches, which for that you could certainly do, because it's there's not that many, so if you weren't comfortable holding more than 2 colours in your hands at a time, then you could certainly go through and duplicate stitch them afterwards. So for that pattern, it gives you a mitten version, a fingerless mitt version, and a wrist warmer version. Some of them don't, some of them just give you a mitten, and some of them just give you a fingerless mitt. If you're looking at some of them in here and you think, oh, I've seen designs similar to these around, because obviously they're using the traditional motifs in some of the areas. I spent hours looking at this book. Yeah, but there's some towards the end. Oh, some lovely orange ones here. I like these. There's nothing to suggest that I was born in the 70s and brought up in the 80s, is there? No. Not at all my aesthetic. And there's some that are very different. So these festive mitts, the styling of these is very different. and they've got fringing on and all sorts. So there's echoes of some of the traditional mitten styles from in the knitting in the Nordic tradition book. Oh, I like these ones as well. The blue star mittens. But you are working with 3 colours, possibly up to 4 colours at a time for those. They do come as a wristwarmer, those. I might try that first. But yeah, they're absolutely beautiful. This one. Again, that's working with up to 4 colours at a time. So they'll be really thick and warm. Yeah, and then so, more traditional looking ones. So yes, if you are into knitting mittens, I would definitely recommend this book, because I don't think it was that expensive either. I think it's got a recommended price of about £16, but I think I paid about less than 10 for it. So for 50 patterns, all of them look perfectly usable and straightforward to understand, and are absolutely beautiful. And I can see me knitting lots and lots of these. These Christmas ones, absolutely beautiful. Yes, when I got it, I'm like, everybody must have mittens for Christmas. And then went, no, I must have lots of mittens of my own. Especially because I lost one of my mittens when I went out the other week. Not my dotty prick-on ones, some other ones that I'd knitted myself. I was very sad. Especially because I lost it in a pub when we'd gone out for a meal, and the meal was horrible and the pub was horrible. So then to come have lost my mitten in there made me extra sad. But yes, that's that one. So they were the 3 that I wanted to talk to you about mostly. Now the next 2 are a bit different. Sorry, just talking for so long. I thought this was going to be a really short one today, but as we know, I like to waffle, so it's quite long. But I was really thirsty, so I just had to drink some of my cold coffee. Oh, I didn't tell you when the Knit Like a Latvian book was published. It was published in... Not going to tell me. No. 2018. Yeah, 2018. By Leva Ozolina. And she does have a website and sells kits for making the mittens. Well, because that was one thing from in here. The wool that she uses doesn't necessarily correspond with any other wool. She uses her own wool and yarn. A natural 2-ply 100% wool is recommended as the best yarn to use, and is also the yarn that has been used traditionally for Latvian mittens. She doesn't tell you what gauge it is, and or what wool it is to use. So I had to go onto her website where she sells the kits and try and work backwards from there to work out the yarn gauge, because it's saying as well for the needles use a 1.5 to 2mm size needle. So I'm like, well, I'm assuming she's not knitting in lace weight, but I think it possibly works out at about a sport sport weight that she's using. I'd have to go back and check, I think. But yeah, that's one thing to bear in mind. You would have to do some research to work out what yarn substitutions you can make for this one. Okay, now this one I wasn't planning on talking about today, but I'd shown it on my Instagram last week sometime, I think, and Jennifer had asked if I'd talk about it on the podcast. Now, I've had this for absolutely ages, but I'd got it back out again the other day because I was looking for something in the bookshelves, and I'm like, oh, I must have this out because it's just amazing, and see if I could find anything out of it to make for the girls, particularly because I knew there was some pyjama and nightie patterns in there, and I need to make Erica some pyjamas or a nightie or something with some fabric I got her ages ago. But yes, it's this from Pancraft Books, and it's called Children's Clothes, and it's by Jill Morris. Now look at the styling on that. I absolutely love this. It was published in early 70s, I think. 74, so 5 years before I was born. Oh, the images in here. There's these little dungarees on the front page. Where are they? Oh, they're not here. Anyway, oh, they're there. Look at those, a little rabbit on. I think I picked this up from the second-hand bookshop in Carnforth, which is an absolute treasure trove of books. And I could spend days in there just searching through all the shelves. So it's got an introduction to sewing and sizing information for making children's clothes. How well they correspond to modern sizing, I'm not sure, because like I said, this was in the 70s. And particularly the styles of dresses are a lot shorter than I would be comfortable with my children wearing now. I mean, I know when I was young I had really like almost tunic length dresses and knickers or shorts, bloomers made in coordinating fabric to make them decent, and so that you could actually be leaping about and things without half a mile of knicker or nappy on show. But yeah, so it goes from sizing information from 6 months to 8 years, and it talks you through basics of different stitches, and you know, how to put up hems in different ways, making your own bias binding, how to work a buttonhole, how to set in a collar, putting in sleeves and darts, and smocking. We do have a section on smocking. I still need to do some. Oh, definitely need to do some smocking at some point. But then it's got a number of different projects that you can make. Now, I'm going to show you the pattern information. This is the pattern. You have to transfer the design up from here onto paper, enlarging it as you go. Now, it does tell you what each square represents. It's not straightforward, and it only gives you the instructions, like the picture, for one size, and then it says if you want to make it for a bigger size or a smaller size, reduce it by so much. Yeah, it says for one size larger, lengthen by 1 inch, or for a smaller size, reduce by 1 inch. So I mean, look at this, is for this little apron thing for a baby. So I think you basically just make the same overall size and you just change the length of it, but it's not as straightforward when you come to the pieced garments for older children later on. So I'll show you some of the pictures. So it's got a christening gown. and then it talks through the construction. The dungarees that I showed you earlier. Some little shorts with braces on, and you can't really see it clearly in this picture, but it's like some kind of leather waistcoat or jerkin. Now this is one of my favourites. I want this for myself. Can I have this in an adult size, please? But see what I mean about the length of the dress? That I would put that on my child with leggings on underneath, but this child's just got it as a dress. And it tells you how to make the blouse as well. So with the like collar and little puffed sleeves. Although for this one, it's made with felt, and you just glue it together because it's a play apron. That's a bit much even for me. I mean, I do like to make my life a bit easier at times, but I think I'd like to be stitching it to give it some longevity. These little dresses, yeah, with the crazy shoulder flounces. They're not, but if you look, the basic garment is very similar to the ones that I made for the girls at Christmas, so that will be straightforward, and I quite like that because it gives you the patterning for the sleeves. So I could use the pattern that I made for the girls for Christmas, and then use this information about sleeve construction to put sleeves into the ones for the girls, because I think they could do with some, and it shows you how to make it into a blouse as well from just that one pattern. This picture, see that little girl's face, just like going, what are you doing turning up at my house? What are you doing here? That's it. So these are for it's like a dressing gown, but for just wearing. It's comfy about the house, but it's not. It doesn't like belt like a dressing gown. It's a all-in-one overall thing. And then this is a raincoat, which I've got raglan type shaping under the sleeves, and looks really straightforward. And for this one, you get the polo neck or bit of an old jumper, and sew it into your fabric for the rest of the pattern. So that'd be good in terms of repurposing different fabrics. It's a lovely fake fur coat. Although I don't know, yes, it describes it as a saucy little hat to go with it. It's not really terminology I want associated with the child's pattern. But yeah, this is a bit more detailed because it's got more pieces for the construction of the coat, and it talks about lining. It's a lined one as well, and it talks you through how to make the hat, which is quite interesting. A zip printed shirt for a little boy or girl. Now that reminds me of a lime green crimpling shirt I've got that I got from a charity shop absolutely years ago. You sweat like I don't know what in it, but it's the ginormous collars. Now this is not my favourite. It looks a bit odd. Now it looks like a hooded jacket, but it's not. This is a jacket, and this is a hood with a weird chin strap. Now I'm used to seeing the hats with chin straps on babies, but on this older child and in the styling, it just looks a bit strange. Oh, a big raincoat with hood, which is essentially sort of creating a giant circle and making that into a rain poncho. Now, nightie for a little girl. I do like that one. Right, just like, can I get away with that? But I think because it's got smocking up here, and because I've got a bust, I suspect it would look interesting. It's very comfortable, I think, but it would look interesting. And it shows you how to make a pyjama version with sort of a cropped top and knicker shorts. Now you see, I'd be tempted to make the nightie length version and make the knicker shorts to go underneath that, because they are a bit short for wearing with nothing over the top of them, I think. It tells you about making a judo pyjamas or a bathrobe. I was wondering about whether I could get away with making these as pyjamas for Erica, but I might use the trouser pattern from here with a shortened version of the nightie pattern from the page before to make a set of pyjamas that way. I want this skirt. I don't want this crazy triangular boob tube top, but I want this skirt. It's beautiful. So it gives you 3 different skirt styles there. A bit of a rah-rah skirt, a short skirt and a long skirt with a ruffled bottom, and it tells you how to make the triangular top as well. Now, are you sophisticated enough for this dress? This is a party dress for sophisticates. I also love this one and want this version for myself. I have quite meaty arms, so I'm not sure that whole puff sleeve, smocking, flared combination is going to do me any favours whatsoever. But it's beautiful. So the sleeves look a bit different in that picture, but in this diagram, I want this. Don't know that I'll be able to go shopping at the supermarket in it, but and I don't really go to parties for sophisticates, so it might not work, but I can't see my girls wearing it either, which is a shame. I might have to make it for myself. Oh, and then some elasticated flared trousers. I quite like the styling of these. I think I'd change the waistband on it though, just because they flare out a bit much from the elastic, because it's elastic braid trim rather than an enclosed elastic waistband. But my oldest girl really suits flares, so I'm quite tempted to make some of these for her. I think she really looks smart in them. And then it's got a bit at the back about knitting and crochet, like a how-to section. And then it does have a couple of knitting patterns. Oh, adorable chubby faced baby. Look at the cheeks. And it's a crazy woolen poncho. So it tells you how to make that. And then there's a little overdress for playing in. It's sleeveless, so it's a bit like a tank top or vest, but with a more pronounced skirt rather than a fitted body. And then some very interesting looking colourwork sweaters. Yes, from a knitting perspective, I'm not a fan of those. But and the last pattern is for some fair hour mittens again, in keeping with the theme. So I do absolutely love this book, and I think it's useful to, or could be useful, to mix and match some of the pattern elements in here with some existing pattern pieces that I've got, to try and make wearable, less 70s outfits for the girls. So that's that, and I really enjoyed that. Right, the last book that I want to talk to you about, because this episode's going to be nearly an hour long, it's ridiculous, is Making Winter by Emma Mitchell. Now, I'd seen this round and about on Instagram and things, and I just really liked the styling of it. So this is a more recent publication. I think this was from last year. Oh no, the year before, 2017. So it's basically, how to describe it, a creative guide to surviving the winter months. So it's different crafts and activities that you can do during winter to help you through quite a dark, cold and sometimes depressing time. I suppose it's creating, you know, the trend was for, you know, the Danish hygge feeling, so that being comfortable and cosy, and it's ways of achieving a similar sort of feeling or ethos through crafting activities. So look, some of the styling and the photography in here, it's beautiful. I'll show you the back as well. Now it's got talks to you about winter itself and different things that you can do, ways of bringing nature indoors during the winter months, because obviously that's something that you can miss, being inside all the time, and whether that's through preserving and drying leaves in autumn, or through sketching different, like doing nature study drawings of different plants, or crocheting projects based on, this one is taking inspiration from the shape of fennel, and talks you through how to create a cowl with echoes of that. It's not umbelliferous because it might be like an upside down umbrella, although I don't think of umbelliferous as that way up. But and it gives you recipes for different food that you can cook. So it's got here some plum, orange and ginger blondies, which look quite interesting. So these are all projects based on a theme of nature. So it's got like making silver jewellery using imprints of leaves and plants, writing a nature diary, and look, this is where they were doing the nature study diagrams. So there's a section called Crudel. In this section called Crudel, sorry, my alarm went off on my phone. Croodle, which means nestling together in the manner of chickens in a cosy coop. But she's likening that to the Danish hygge or German gemütlichkeit, Swedish gemütlig, no, gemütlig, or the Italian commodita. So it's that, oh, that comfy, cosy, warm feeling. So this one's got a pattern for a shawl. It's another crochet pattern. The project pictures for the crochet projects aren't brilliant, I have to say that. It's got a recipe for apple and caramel Chelsea buns, which look absolutely delicious. Recipe for making hawthorn gin. Do like my flavoured gins. Homemade firelighters. So it's all projects, crafts that you can do at home across a range of crafts. Hedgerow bird snacks. So taking old coconut shells and filling them with lard and seeds and berries and things. High days and celebrations is the next section. So you know, for things for over Christmas or other festive periods, or on birthdays during the winter months, different things you can do, different crafts. So for making decorations about the house, but very much with a sort of a nature based theme. So here there's some garlands with leaves, paper leaves on, and a crocheted necklace to be given as gifts, and almond blackberry streusel cake recipe, cocktail recipes, making woodland wreaths, and different information on different plants to look out for that you can use for making wreaths and bring into your house, and then some ideas of what to do when it's really, you know, for the days when you get to January and you've had all the excitement of Christmas or whatever, and the days are really, really long and you've got no money and it's the longest month ever. So you've got a recipe for a 5-minute chocolate fondant in a mug, and it is styled in this wonderful sort of hand formed ceramic mug, which is beautiful. And some wrist warmers, again crochet. I think all the wool related projects are crochet. More jewellery making with beads and things. Mark making with watercolours, again using nature as your inspiration. So not doing a sort of detailed picture, but making yourself a scrapbook and just making shapes on paper. So copying repeats and repeats of variations of leaf shapes or formats. And then the last section I think is looking ahead to spring, so planting bulbs for the new year, and what flowers and bulbs you can plant, and to bring some early colour and life into your world. Again, another crochet pattern for some boot cuffs based on hellebores. Information on how to draw feathers. And there are some lovely illustrations in here, and making forcing blooms on cuttings from branches, so that you can get some early sorry, talk that much that I ran out of storage space. Right, very briefly. So as well as forcing blossom on trimmings from trees, it gives you a recipe for lemon, thyme and ginger bars, which look quite nice. Some more ideas of people to follow on Instagram that will give you further ideas for creating coziness and you know, the creativity involving nature. So then it's got some details of the makers and suppliers who provided wool and things for the, or beads and bits for the projects, and then a bit about the author. Now, it's a visually stunning book. It's really, much as I don't normally like a flat lay on Instagram, I do think that the images in here are really, really beautiful. But because of the project, the nature of the projects, the craft-based one, the textile-based ones, so the crochet ones, they all seem quite basic, and I know how to do a lot of the things in here already. So if you are someone who's already crafty, I would probably say get it out of the library rather than buying it, unless you just want to sit and look at the pictures and have it on the table. Just making you feel all nice and cosy just by looking at it. But yes, it's a nice book to look at. It's a nice book to read. Some lovely images and some lovely ideas for crafts that you can do over the winter months. I appreciate that's not very useful now that we're going into spring, but I need to take it back to the library today, so I thought, I need to do this. Right, if you've managed to get all the way through that, thank you very much. Hopefully it'll have been of some interest to you, and hopefully you've enjoyed some of the books as much as I did, or at least hearing about them. Alright then, thank you very much, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time with a regular, more update on my crafting projects. Alright then, thank you very much for listening. Bye bye.